She didn't come to Seoul to be noticed. Delilah Conte came to do a job. A quiet, precise, devastating job, the kind that ended careers and collapsed empires from the inside, without a single raised voice, without a single moment of drama. The kind that required a woman to sit in rooms full of powerful men, smile at exactly the right moments, and never once let them see how much she already knew. She had done it in Paris. She had done it in Nairobi. She had done it in Singapore, sitting across a glass table from a man who controlled 3 shipping ports and 2 government ministers, watching him explain his own financial structure to her as though she hadn't already mapped every illegal thread running through it before she landed at Changi Airport. Men like that always underestimated her. She had stopped being surprised by it years ago. The gala was held at the Grand Hyatt Seoul, 43rd floor, floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking a city that never fully dimmed. Even at 8 o'clock, the Han River caught the light and threw it back at the sky in long silver ribbons. Delilah stood near the east window with a glass of champagne she hadn't touched and looked at it for a moment, not with wonder, but with the quiet appreciation of a woman who noticed beautiful things and filed them away without making a production of it. She had arrived at exactly 8 o'clock. Not fashionably late. Not anxiously early. Exactly on time, which in rooms like this was its own kind of statement. Her gown was deep burgundy, fitted, moving with her the way clothes moved on a woman who had long since stopped dressing to be looked at and started dressing to be taken seriously. Her hair was pinned back. Her jewelry was minimal. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server, found her position near the east window, and began to watch. She was very good at watching. The room was full of the particular category of person who attended events like this: ministers and their deputies, investment bankers and the lawyers who protected them. Old money sitting comfortably beside new money that was trying very hard not to look new. Everyone performing a version of themselves that was slightly better than the truth. Delilah wasn't performing anything. She had been there 11 minutes when a server came from her left, moving quickly, eyes scanning the far end of the room for something he hadn't found yet. He wasn't looking at her. He wasn't looking at anything near her. He was simply moving through space on autopilot, the way people moved when they had been on their feet for 4 hours and their attention had started to thin at the edges. He placed the silver tray directly into her hands. Delilah looked down at it. She didn't move. She didn't correct him. She didn't call after him. She didn't make a sound or a face or a gesture that the people nearby could read. She simply stood there while he disappeared back into the crowd, completely unaware of what he had done. The people nearest to her noticed. A woman in green glanced over and looked away with the careful speed of someone who had decided not to see what they had just seen. A man nearby let his eyes rest on her a beat too long, curious in the way people were curious about situations they were glad weren't happening to them. Delilah felt all of it. Every glance, every careful look away, every small recalibration happening in the people around her. She felt it the way she always felt things fully, completely, without showing a single layer of it on her face. And then Shin Hyunwoo walked in. The room didn't applaud. It simply reorganized itself around him. Conversation shifted, bodies turned by degrees. The energy in the space pulled toward him the way iron filings pull toward a magnet. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just steadily, inevitably, with the kind of quiet force that didn't announce itself because it didn't need to. He was tall, immaculate in black. His suit was the kind that cost more than most people's monthly salary and looked it without trying to look it. His face was sharp and still, the particular stillness of a man who had spent so long being in control of every room he entered that composure had stopped being an effort and become simply the shape of him. He moved through the crowd without hurrying. His eyes swept the room with the practiced efficiency of a man who had learned very young to catalog spaces, threats and assets and exits and opportunities, all sorted and filed in the time it took most people to find a drink. His eyes landed on Delilah. 2 seconds, he leaned toward the associate at his shoulder and said, without lowering his voice nearly enough, "Tell the catering company their staff shouldn't be mingling with guests." The people nearby went quiet. Someone laughed, short, sharp, swallowed almost immediately, but not quite fast enough. Delilah stood very still. 1 breath. 2. The tray was still in her hands. The city was still spread out behind the glass, indifferent and glittering. She set the tray down on the windowsill beside her champagne glass. Slowly, without any particular emphasis. The way you set down something you were simply finished with. Then she smoothed the front of her gown with one hand, one single, unhurried motion, and walked. Not quickly. Not with the sharp energy of a woman making a point. Just walked, the way she always walked, like she was the only person in the room who knew exactly where she was going and had all the time in the world to get there. Directly to the head table, where her name card sat in gold lettering between the Deputy Minister of Finance and the CEO of one of Seoul's largest private investment firms. She pulled out her chair. She sat down. Nobody stopped her. Nobody said a word. The pocket of silence she had walked away from slowly refilled itself with conversation, but something had changed in the room. Something small and irreversible. He would understand what had happened. Just not in the way he expected. And definitely not in front of everyone. If that silence hit you the way it hit the room, do me a favor, like this video, subscribe to this channel and don't go anywhere. Because the rest of this and more is going to hit harder. Fasten your seatbelt. Let's go for a ride. The formal introduction came 14 minutes later. Director Yoon was a round-faced man in his late 50s who laughed at his own jokes before he finished telling them, and had somehow maneuvered both Delilah and Hyunwoo within range near the bar, materializing between them with the cheerful obliviousness of a man who had no idea what he was standing in the middle of. Mr. Shin, you haven't met Ms. Delilah Conte. She's heading the International Commission's review of several regional investment portfolios. Brilliant woman. Absolutely brilliant. Speaks 4 languages, you know. Hyunwoo turned. His eyes settled on her face with the same cataloging attention he had given the room when he walked in. She let him look. She had been assessed by men like this her entire professional life, and she had learned long ago not to perform under scrutiny. Not to fill silence with reassurance or soften herself at the edges to make the assessment easier. She simply stood there and let him look. Miss Conte, he said. His voice was low and even, carrying the particular quality of a man who had never needed to raise it. Mr. Shin, she said. He extended his hand. She took it. Brief, efficient, over before it began. The handshake of a man for whom physical contact was a formality to be completed rather than a connection to be made. He redirected the conversation then, smoothly, without visible effort, turning slightly toward the man on his left and pulling the thread of discussion somewhere else entirely. A masterclass in subtle dismissal. Technically polite. Practically invisible to anyone not paying close attention. Delilah was always paying close attention. She excused herself with a small smile that gave nothing away and returned to her seat. Later, in the back of a black car moving through the lit streets of Yongsan, she said nothing for a long time. Not hurt. Not angry. Just still. The stillness of a woman who had decided long ago that reaction was a currency she would never waste on a man who hadn't earned it. Every reaction she gave was a piece of information. And she was extremely careful about what information she distributed, and to whom. She opened her laptop. His name was already on the screen. Shin Hyunwoo. Threaded through 17 companies that didn't officially belong to him, shell structures, nested inside holding groups, nested inside offshore accounts, each one a careful legal step removed from the last. Each one designed to be invisible to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for the shape of what she was looking for. She had been looking for exactly this shape for 3 weeks. She studied the screen for a long moment. The numbers. The names. The careful architecture of a man who was brilliant and thorough and completely convinced that what he had built was airtight. Then she closed the laptop. Not yet. 3 weeks later, his financial network started to bleed. Quiet at first. A flagged transaction in a subsidiary account. A suspended clearance on a transfer that should have moved without friction. An audit trigger on a holding company that had operated invisibly for 6 years. Each one small, each one individually explainable. But to a man whose entire empire was built on the premise that his money moved in absolute silence, who had designed every structure around the principle of invisibility, even a whisper was deafening. He called his financial director at 6 in the morning. By 8, he had his legal team on a conference call. By noon, after 2 hours of his people turning over every stone they could reach, someone set a single sheet of paper on his desk. A name. Delilah Conte. Senior Forensic Analyst. International Capital Audit Commission. Access level, full. Scope of investigation, unrestricted. He sat with the paper for a long time. Then he set it down very carefully and said nothing for the rest of the afternoon. The second encounter happened at a private business dinner in Gangnam, 12 people, a long lacquered table in a private room at a restaurant that didn't have a sign outside and didn't need one. The kind of dinner where the food was exceptional and nobody tasted it because everyone was too busy tasting the conversation for information. Delilah had been invited as a representative of the commission. She wore deep green, arrived exactly on time, found her seat, and settled into it with the ease of a woman who was comfortable in rooms that weren't designed for her comfort. Hyunwoo was already there. For places down and across. Close enough for awareness, far enough for deniability. When she entered, he didn't look up from his conversation. But she noticed the half-second pause in his response to whatever the man beside him had just said, brief, barely visible, the kind of pause that only meant something if you were already watching for it. She was always watching for it. For the first hour, he acted as though she wasn't there. She let him. She ate. She spoke when spoken to. She asked 2 questions that were more precise than they appeared on the surface and absorbed the answers carefully. The room was full of the particular performance that happened when powerful people gathered in small spaces and pretended to be relaxed, everyone managing their presentation, everyone calculating the distance between what they were saying and what they meant. Delilah wasn't calculating. She was simply present. In a room like that, it was almost radical. Then a question came from the far end of the table, complicated, layered, about cross-border capital flow regulations and their implications for regional investment structures. It was directed generally toward the room but angled, by the weight of assumption and the slight tilt of the speaker's body, toward Hyunwoo. The table waited. Delilah answered it first. No preamble. No apology. No glance in his direction to check whether she had permission. She simply began speaking, in the same even unhurried tone she used for everything, and gave the answer, the complete, accurate, irrefutable answer, with the calm authority of someone who had written 3 published papers on the subject and been cited in 2 government regulatory reviews. She didn't look at him once while she gave it. The table didn't move for a moment. Then it shifted. Not toward him. Toward her. 3 people asked follow-up questions in quick succession. She answered all 3 without hesitating, without softening, without performing modesty she didn't feel. The conversation moved in the direction she had sent it and stayed there, and the man who had asked the original question nodded with the particular satisfaction of someone who had received considerably more than they were expecting. Hyunwoo said nothing. And for the first time that evening, he didn't interrupt. He reached for his glass, took a slow sip, and looked at her with an expression nobody at that table had seen on his face before, not hostility, not the polished dismissiveness of the gala, but something quieter and more unsettled. The expression of a man who had walked into a room he thought he knew and found the furniture had been moved. He watched her move through the rest of the dinner with the careful patience of a man trying to understand something that kept refusing to be understood on his terms. She was exactly the same in every exchange, precise, present, completely unbothered by the architecture of the room around her. Never performing. Never adjusting. It unsettled him more than he expected. Later, in a pause between conversations, he tested her directly, a question with a blade built into the phrasing, addressed to her for the first time all evening, designed to make a person hesitate or overcorrect. Ms. Conte, he said, in a tone the table could hear, in your experience, when an audit commission engages with investment structures of significant complexity, at what point does professional interest become personal? The nearby conversations went briefly quiet. Delilah looked at him. She didn't hesitate. She didn't reach for the meaning beneath the question or acknowledge the blade inside it. She simply answered. That depends entirely, she said, on whether the structure was built to withstand scrutiny or simply to avoid it. The 2 require very different responses. 1 second of eye contact. Then she turned back to the woman on her left and resumed the conversation she had set down to answer him. as though the exchange had been entirely unremarkable. As though she had simply answered a question and moved on, the way a person moved on from things that hadn't touched them. The table exhaled almost imperceptibly. Hyunwoo was quiet for the rest of the dinner. He left before dessert. His driver asked where to. He didn't answer for a full minute. The third encounter he arranged himself. He told himself it was a strategy, a controlled environment, an assessment of what she had and what she intended to do with it. The same calculus he applied to every threat that entered his orbit: assess, engage, neutralize. He was already lying. She walked into the private lounge of a hotel in Itaewon at 7:15 on a Tuesday evening, and he understood immediately that she had known he'd arranged it. It was in everything she didn't do, no surprise in her face when the host led her to his table, no adjustment in her posture upon seeing him, no performance of arriving somewhere unexpected. She had known. She came anyway, and he didn't know what to do with that. She sat down across from him, ordered tea, settled into her chair with the particular ease of a woman who had made a decision, somewhere along the way, that she would never again give a room or a person the power to put her off balance. She looked at him and waited. He opened with business. Careful, hypothetical, dressed in professional courtesy. He outlined a scenario. What might an auditor do? He wondered aloud, if she found herself in possession of information that could be interpreted in more than one way. Information where the line between obligation and judgment was not entirely clear. He watched her face while he spoke. She let him finish. Then she set her teacup down. "You've been inside my financial structure for weeks," he said, and the hypothetical dropped away entirely. His voice was quiet and very even. "Why haven't you exposed it?" She looked at him, directly, with the full, uncomplicated attention of a woman who had nothing to perform and nowhere to hide and wasn't interested in either. "Because I'm still deciding if you deserve it." The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. He studied her face. He had sat across from prosecutors with evidence in hand and fury behind their eyes. Rival bosses who wanted him gone and were civilized about it. Government officials who had tried to dismantle everything his father built and called it regulation. He had never, in any of those rooms, felt the precise quality of disadvantage he felt right now. "That's an interesting word," he said. "Deserve. You disagree with it?" "I'm not accustomed to it," he said. "Most people in your position have already decided what they want from me before they walk into the room." "I know what I could want from you," she said. "That's not the same thing as wanting it." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at her the way he looked at contracts written in a language he was still learning carefully, without pretending to understand more than he did. "What would change your decision?" he said. "Nothing you could offer me," she said. "That's not how I work." "Then what?" She considered the question. Not performing consideration, actually sitting with it, which was different, and which he noticed. "The truth," she said finally. "Not the version you give people when you want something from them. The actual truth." He leaned back slightly. The movement of a man recalibrating. Then he dropped everything. "My father built the first company when I was 9 years old," he said. Not a defense. Not a justification. Just the truth, placed between them like something he was setting down. "By the time I was 14, I knew every account, every transaction, every name. By 23, it was all mine." A pause. "I didn't build the structure to disappear. I built it because the men who called their money legitimate had far more blood on it than mine. And they had the law. I needed something the law couldn't reach." He said it without softening it, without asking for anything in return. It hit her harder than anything else he could have done. Because she could defend herself against power plays, she had been doing it her entire life, and she was exceptional at it. But she had no prepared defense against a man who simply put the truth down and stepped away from the armor. That she hadn't anticipated. And the things she didn't anticipate were the things that cost her. She didn't show it. But something shifted behind her eyes, just slightly, just enough, and he saw it. And she knew that he saw it. And neither of them acknowledged it, which made it louder than if they had. "That doesn't make it legal," she said. "No," he said. "It doesn't. It doesn't make it right either." "No," he said again. "But I stopped pretending the line between right and legal was the same line a long time ago." He looked at her steadily. "Didn't you?" She held his gaze. Yes, she said quietly. A long time ago. Something shifted in the air between them. Not softening exactly, more like two people simultaneously setting down something heavy they had both been carrying, and finding, to their mutual surprise, that the space between them felt different without the weight. The conversation ran long after that. Neither of them moved to end it. They talked about the commission, what it actually did versus what it claimed to. About Seoul, about the particular way the city held its wealth differently from the other cities she had worked in. She mentioned Abidjan briefly, the way she talked about home, not with nostalgia, just with the clear-eyed affection of someone who had grown up inside the truth of a place rather than the idea of it. He listened the way most people didn't listen, without preparing his next sentence while she was still speaking. Just taking it in. At some point the table between them felt smaller than it had at the beginning of the evening. Their hands rested on the surface, his near the edge, fingers loose, hers wrapped around her cup. Close enough to touch. Neither of them reached. Neither of them pulled away. And somehow that felt louder than anything they had said all evening. The not reaching. The staying exactly where they were. The awareness of the distance, small enough that closing it would have cost nothing, small enough that not closing it was a decision they were both making, consciously, every minute, together. When she finally stood to leave, it was past 10 o'clock. He stood too. Not calculated. Not strategic. Just reflex, the kind that came from somewhere older and more honest than strategy. She noticed. Mr. Shin, she said, picking up her coat. Hyunwoo, he said. She paused. Looked at him across the small table, in the low light of the lounge, with the city pressing against the glass behind him. Something passed across her face, not warmth, not softness, but something in the direction of both. Something she allowed herself for exactly one unguarded moment before she filed it away. She left without correcting herself either way. He sat back down, ordered something stronger than he usually drank, and stared at the space she had occupied for a long time. 2 days later, a motion was filed internally within the commission to have her audit portfolio transferred, a quiet bureaucratic reshuffling, the kind that appeared routine on paper and would have effectively buried 3 months of her work and removed her from the investigation entirely. Clean. Technically untraceable. The kind of move made by people who knew how institutions worked and how to use that knowledge without leaving fingerprints. It was reversed within 48 hours. Delilah found out through a contact 2 levels above her in the commission structure, who called her with the slightly stunned quality of someone who had just watched a wall that shouldn't have moved move. She thanked her. Hung up. Sat at her desk in the quiet of her apartment with the Han River visible through the window, flat and silver in the afternoon light. She didn't call him. She didn't send a message. She opened her audit file and navigated through it with the careful precision she brought to everything, until she reached the document she had been considering for weeks, one thread among 17, the one that connected everything. The one that would have been not just the final nail, but the entire coffin. Irrefutable. Devastating. The kind of evidence that ended things completely and permanently and left nothing standing. She looked at it for a long time. Then she moved it to a separate folder, encrypted it, filed the rest. She told herself it was strategy, professional judgment, deliberate precision. She told herself she was simply being careful, being thorough, being the person she had always been. She almost believed it. She didn't expect to see him again so soon. Thursday evening, the lobby of a building in Yeonggu where she had a late meeting with a commission colleague. Marble floors, low light, the kind of lobby designed to make people feel the weight of money without being obvious about it. She was moving toward the elevator bank when the main doors opened behind her and the atmosphere shifted in the specific way she had come to recognize without looking. She turned. Hyunwoo stood 20 feet away. No associate beside him. No entourage, no architecture of occasion around him. Just him, in a dark coat, slightly rain-damp at the shoulders, looking at her with an expression she had no existing category for, something open in it, something his face didn't usually allow. Something she suspected very few people had ever been on the receiving end of. Neither of them spoke for a moment. This wasn't arranged, he said. I know, she said. He crossed the lobby toward her. Slowly, the way a man moved when he was choosing every step consciously, when he understood that the ground might shift beneath him and had decided, somewhere between the door and where she stood, that he was going to keep walking anyway. He stopped close. Closer than business. Closer than any of their previous encounters. Close enough that she could see the particular stillness of his face when it wasn't performing anything, the slight tension at the edge of his jaw, the way he was looking at her like she was the only fixed point in a room that had been moving around him for weeks. She didn't step back. "You filed the report," he said quietly. "Most of it," she said. Something moved across his face, unguarded in a way his face almost never was. Not relief exactly. Something that relief was built on top of. Something that looked like a man who had been holding a particular breath for a long time and had only just understood that he could put it down. He looked at her the way he had never looked at anyone in that lobby, in any room she could imagine him standing in. Like she was something he hadn't planned for. Like she had walked into the precise center of a life he had controlled completely and, without trying, without wanting anything from him, simply refused to be managed. He lifted his hand, slowly, deliberately, and placed it against her jaw, barely touching, the backs of his fingers against her cheek, the lightest possible contact, the kind that asked a question without speaking it out loud. She went very still. Her eyes stayed on his. He leaned forward, just slightly, just enough, and the distance between them became something with a weight and a temperature and a name that neither of them had said out loud yet. She could feel the warmth of him in the small space that remained between them. His eyes dropped once, just once, to her mouth. Then came back up. And then his phone rang. The sound cut through the lobby like glass breaking. He didn't move. Not for 1 second. 2. 3. For long enough that the ringing felt like something they were both standing inside, both waiting to see which way it would fall. Then something shifted behind his eyes. A door closing. The return of the man who answered things, who managed things, who had an empire that did not pause because he was standing in a marble lobby with his hand against a woman's face and the distance between them measured in centimeters. He stepped back, dropped his hand, looked at the screen. "I have to take this," he said. His voice was even, controlled. Everything his face wasn't 1 second ago. "I know," she said. She turned, walked to the elevator bank, pressed the button and stood with her back straight and her hands loose at her sides and her face giving away exactly nothing, which was what it always gave away, which was what she had always been exceptional at, which had never in her life cost her very much. It cost her something now. The doors opened. She stepped inside. As they slid closed, she caught his reflection in the polished metal, still standing exactly where she had left him. Phone to his ear. Eyes on the elevator. Watching. The way a man watched something he had just realized too late, in a marble lobby, with the wrong timing and a phone call he would spend the rest of the night resenting that he was not finished with. Not even close. Every person in Shinheinwa's world leaned toward him. Adjusted for him. Performed for him. She never did. Not once. And somewhere between trying to control her and failing to understand her, he realized something he had never experienced before. He wasn't in control of this anymore. She was. And for the first time in his life, he didn't want to be. But what Delilah does with that folder and what Hyunwoo does the moment that call ends, I know you'll be dying to know. Trust me, I am too. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe, like this video. And drop a comment right now. Do you think she'll use it? Or has he already changed the answer to that question without either of them realizing it? Tell me. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.